Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donohue. We've got another game week to get into. It is Halloween, the last day of October. 2/3 of the season are in the books. We have November with 4 games on the schedule that will determine what lies ahead for Penn State in terms of postseason conversation and what lies ahead for them in terms of national perception, because I think a lot of us spotted Penn State through a couple months at 6-2. Maybe people had them losing earlier at Auburn or at Purdue and having 3 losses to this point. But for a long time, going back to this offseason, it felt like this Penn State season and what we were going to make of it was going to hinge on what happened in November. We'll do some looking ahead on this episode, but as usual on Monday, we bring back Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen right here into the Lions247 Podcast and get an opportunity to look back a bit at the most recent matchup. And of course, this is a conversation that's going to be had for a long time when reviewing Penn State versus Ohio State, modern era of college football. This is a matchup we're going to be discussing time and time again. And Mark, sitting next to you in the press box, it was like watching that pendulum go back and forth in the fourth quarter. Ultimately, though, Ohio State was able to get successful plays, and Penn State did not have the responses. We talked about the turnovers a lot in our last episode. We talked about how the defense, the wheels came off a bit as those possessions piled up for Ohio State. Where do you want to start this conversation on a Monday?
I guess maybe I'll paint it in a semi-positive way in saying that, this was yet another game for Penn State against Ohio State, the bellwether program in the Big Ten. I mean, the program by which every other Big Ten program is measured. And Penn State proved that athletically, physically, speed, all of those things, it's right there with that program. That's the positive. The negative is, how many times have we seen this picture where Penn State is right there and either can't claw back and get over the hump or has a lead and allows Ohio State to escape at the end? And that's the difficult thing for fans to kind of absorb. I think they're almost resigned to the fact, like after that game, I didn't catch like terrible anger coming from the stands. I heard one person yell at Franklin. Or going through the tunnel, the fans actually seem sort of not happy, but they weren't. I've gone through that tunnel where fans were freaking out after a loss on the team and on James Franklin, and I think everybody's just kind of resigned to this is what it is. They can't take that next step, and so the positive is you're right there with Ohio State on so many different key levels. Arguably, as much as anybody else in the Big Ten. Clearly, Michigan made a major stride last year, so you can make the argument for Michigan. But you're right there. But unfortunately for Penn State, and it's going to be the same thing next year, you're in the same division as this team. And until you're able to prove that you can get over that, you're not going to be fighting for Big Ten and national titles. It's just not going to happen. You look at our predictions for this game, and every single person but one, and I think Ed, our special guest, was just trying to help out so it wasn't all people predicting Penn State, but everybody picked Ohio State to win. I mean, everybody expected this to happen. Did we expect it to happen in the way it happened? Probably not. I don't think anybody would have expected them to be up 21, 15 or whatever it was, 16 in the fourth, like 9 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, and then give up 28 points and simply implode. But you're right there. And every time you figure a way to snatch victory to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yeah, we all did pick Ohio State, but we all did pick Penn State to cover at
relatively
15
close,
and a half point margin. And because we've seen enough of these matchups, and I know, Daniel, you're a little bit newer to the beat, but you followed this one from afar in the past, and Penn State has had that pedigree. I think that you mentioned something interesting here is the post-game attitude after a loss to Ohio State right now in 2022 feels different than the post-game attitude after Ohio State lost in 2018, when this matchup really felt like kind of an early play-in game to get to Indianapolis. You're a couple weeks removed from getting beat down in Michigan. That's not going to help things. But Daniel, that's the danger to me in November. You have to really assert yourself as that next team behind an Ohio State or a Michigan, rather than falling back to the cluster. Because I think since that 2018 loss to where we are in 2022, Penn State has not made the positive momentum in going higher up the ladder towards Penn State or towards Ohio State, I should say, while Michigan has improved their standing on that ladder. Instead, they've kind of fallen back to the pack a little bit by picking up some of these losses. You lose to an Indiana in 2020, you lose to Maryland. Last year you lose to an Illinois. Those things start to add up, and it starts to impact national perception, but also just the way that you are gauged in the Big Ten Conference. And that, to me, is why November is so important, because you got to figure out where exactly they lie in the conference hierarchy. And I think we've got a lot of figuring out to do after the last 2 seasons and 8 games.
Yeah, when you look at kind of the excuse me, when you look at kind of the tiers within the Big Ten, last year Michigan State took that leap and leapfrogged Penn State, asserted itself, made a New Year's Six bowl, and they've fallen back to the pack this year. So I think that if you're Penn State, you want to assert yourself as that above this tier of teams that's coming up. The next 4 teams on Penn State's schedule are all the teams that are behind them in the Big Ten standings. And I think that when you look at, any sort of positive that you can get out of this from, this is probably the low point of the season, lower than Michigan, because after the Michigan game, you had that, okay, there's that Ohio State game. We're not completely out of it yet. But at this point, it's going to be probably Ohio State or Michigan in Indianapolis in December. So I think that what you need to do is, you need to assert yourself, find your footing, finish strong, and show that you're still that next team up. That if Ohio State, if Michigan stumble, that you're well positioned to take that leap, to be there to take advantage of mistakes. I know that that's probably not the most comforting thing right now for a fan base that has its eyes on a Big Ten title, that has its eyes on competing nationally. But we saw where things stand with how the games against Michigan and Ohio State went. Those are the top 2 teams in the Big Ten East, and Penn State needs to, figure out where it stands, and it can solidify where it stands over these last 4 weeks.
Now, fairly soon, guys, we're going to be in an era of college football where we get to November covering a 2-loss team, and we're still talking about college football playoff possibilities. I'm really excited for it. I think it's going to be great for a lot of college football fans, a lot of people who cover college football, because it'll open up that conversation deeper into the autumn. But where we are right now in the current structure, the fact of the matter is you pick up your second loss, and you have to now start to bring into play that springboard launch pad conversation about where you want to be going into December, January, when the transfer portal is really picking up, when you've got some high priority prospects still out there. And generally, you're just trying to make sure that you are going in with a sense of positive momentum. And Penn State hasn't been able to do that year in, year out. Before we start talking about trying to go 4-0 the rest of the way, Mark, do you think there is something to the attitude adjustment, I guess, in the way that this game was kind of viewed, where if Penn State pulled off a win, great, it's an awesome surprise, but the result was kind of as expected. Whereas in 18, it felt like more of a coin flip, and people were genuinely angry when this team lost, and not feeling like, hey, it would have been upset. They felt like they belonged in that matchup. Do you sense something like that in a 4-year span where there has been a change of sorts?
Yeah, I guess and maybe I'm talking out of place here in terms of the structure of the show today, but yeah, I think that's why some of us were arguing that Minnesota would have been the game to go with Drew Allar, because what was the argument then? We knew what Clifford was all about. We knew what Sean Clifford was all about, and when he got into those games against the elite teams, he struggled. And I don't want to say I told you so, but yeah, I mean, Clifford was player of the week, Big Ten offensive player of the week against Minnesota. And I won't add the pause because I don't want to, that wouldn't be funny at this point. But so would Allar have given you a better shot to win? I don't know. But I just think we knew what Sean Clifford was. So why I mention that is because I think now I think they, in that Minnesota game, for better or worse, whether you like it or not, and I think I know which way fans may go on this, but they committed to Sean Clifford for the rest of the season. Because if you were going to play him, you needed to play Allar against Minnesota to prepare him for Ohio State. Why would you play him now? Like, you would play him like it later in games and stuff, but I don't think you would start him, because now you look at Jerry Palm's bowl projections, and they still have Penn State going to the Orange Bowl. And I mean, that would be a nice perk at the end of the season. And if you're able to finish the season with 4 straight wins, and these are the games that Sean Clifford wins, right? These are the games that Sean Clifford wins. And they're going to be favored in every one of these games. So, yeah, I mean, I think now they're committed to Sean Clifford, and that wasn't great for Ohio State, as it turned out. But moving ahead, he gives you the best opportunity to win these 4 games and carry momentum into next season and get to a New Year's Six bowl game and do all those things, have that positive vibe going into transfer portal season and all those other things. So that's kind of, I know that was a roundabout way to look at it, but, you know, it's kind of the elephant in the room. But I think they made their decision, and it didn't work against Ohio State. But maybe they were thinking, hey, if we could at least get to a New Year's Six game and finish with double-digit wins, that's a good overall thing for the program.
That was Sean Clifford's 41st career start, second consecutive game where Penn State comes out the gate stumbling offensively. No points generated in back-to-back weeks in the first quarter. Sean Clifford's passing stats were not good. 3 interceptions in those 2 first quarters. But we talked about this in the postgame show. They answered back with a couple of scoring drives to go up 14-0 in this matchup. The defense was able to do some stopping of the bleeding on a Sean Clifford turnover early in the game, forced a long field goal. They were able to get going offensively. 7 of 8 passing with Sean Clifford on those 2 possessions, 156 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 throws that went 20+. Penn State goes into the locker room on a high off a defensive stand in the red zone, and Sean Clifford's a big part of that reason why. But isn't it always waiting for the other shoe to drop with the fan base and frankly for us in the press box? Because Sean Clifford, you talk about some of the games he has historically won, he has not won these games. And the signature moments in Sean Clifford's career, it's pretty remarkable. He's at the point now, he had an extra season. You know, Trace McSorley didn't get an opportunity to come back for year 6. A lot of guys in Penn State history who maybe would have done that did not. But he's now quietly, it seemed, last Saturday, thrown more passes than anybody in a Penn State uniform in history. He's got the most pass attempts past that mark Saturday. Now has the most touchdown throws in Penn State history. Jumped Trace McSorley on that board Saturday when he threw for 3 scores. But 4 turnovers on the day. You can talk about how much of that was lent to a virtuoso performance from an opposing player, and how much of that was Sean Clifford not delivering in the moment when they needed him to deliver clean football. But the bottom line is this: is his first 3 interception game since Minnesota. That Minnesota game in 2019, I should say, when their unbeaten season ended. And for me, I think a lot of fans, when they look back at Sean Clifford's body of work, there's just few signature moments of winning a big game behind his arm, behind his play against a high caliber opponent. A lot of these games are Sean Clifford fighting hard, tooth and nail, overcoming some of his own mistakes, trying to overcome some of his team's mistakes, and falling short against those kind of opponents. There's also been some occasions like the Michigan matchup a few weeks ago where there's just been a complete thud on the offensive side of the football, and Penn State has been embarrassed on national TV. And I looked through the numbers a little bit. This was his 8th career game, Daniel, with 300+ passing yards. He had 295 last week against Minnesota, so don't want to shortchange that. But only 3 times did they win those games. They're 3-5 in his career when he goes 300+ passing yards. Twice they beat Maryland. Once they beat Villanova. And so, again, modern-day college football, you look at the air assaults going on across the way, the wide receivers putting up huge numbers. This is not really coming off of a clunker of a game offensively in the passing attack, but the numbers just start to stack up in his career. And unfortunately for Sean, they just don't skew in a direction that's going to lead people to say this was a quarterback who delivered big-time wins in big-time moments. It almost feels like this is a 4-year stretch where the program tread water for phases of that. And unfortunately, fairly or not, much of that is going to get tagged to the QB1 during that span.
It paints the picture of a quarterback who couldn't elevate a team or a program by himself, which, I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That is really hard to do. There are only a certain number of elite quarterbacks every year. I know that with terms of some of the counting stats and the numbers, you look around and you think that, plenty of, quarterbacks can do that. But, it's a tough position to play. But, he's just never been able to be the one who is going to take his team over the hump. You would see glimpses of it, like the Purdue game, where in those last 2 minutes, he's able to lead the team to victory. But that just never translated against the better teams in the Big Ten, the better teams on Penn State's schedule. And, that's a tough spot to be in. And, he's just been a quarterback who needs a lot of things around him going right in order to succeed. You look at his first year in 2019 when Penn State had a very good and, for the most part, healthy stable of running backs around him. And that'll probably go down as Sean Clifford's best season. And then 2020 COVID year, that was just a weird situation all around. Last year, no running game. And then this year, the running game is back. And I think that we've seen Sean Clifford play better with that around him. But when it came to the point where, all right, we need you to make the right decisions. We need you to play clean football. We need you to keep this game within reach, to not let it get out of hand. In that Michigan game, in this Ohio State game, he couldn't do it. And I think that that's something that a lot of people are going to remember. It's interesting when you think about Sean Clifford's place in the record books, because he's going to be atop all of these counting stats. But by the time his career is done, by virtue of his longevity, which, I'm not one of the people that's going to take anything away from him, because he was around the longest, so he has the most stats. I mean, he's still thrown a bunch of touchdown passes. You can't really take that away from him. But it'll be interesting, 20, 30 years down the road when you look at these, in the record books and you see him up so high, and then you square that with what the reality was for the team during this stretch. It's going to be some really interesting context, and it'll be really interesting to see how history kind of looks back on these 4 years of Penn State football.
I think the problematic part of it is when you think about the best overall team performances that Penn State has put together with him as a starting quarterback. And obviously an overall team performance is going to involve a strong quarterback performance typically. You got to go back to 2019 for several of them. The Cotton Bowl win over Memphis, they leaned on the ground. I think they set a Cotton Bowl record for rushing yards that day with Journey Brown, Noah Cain, Devin Ford, Ricky Slade all involved there. The Iowa matchup in 2019, where they kind of won in spite of Sean Clifford. That's the first game we saw him, go on the road against a Big Ten team in that kind of environment. Noah Cain came up big down the stretch. Their defense played phenomenally. They won that in 2019. And then I think about some of the more recent matchups, a couple against Auburn, of course, last year, this year. But Auburn's coach is probably going to get fired, and he's been their coach for these 2 year span. And so that's kind of the Tigers team that you were facing in those matchups. I know they were a top 25 opponent last year. And then another one that comes to mind that was maybe the best moment of Sean Clifford's career, maybe the most promising moment of Sean Clifford's career, threw 3 touchdowns in the first half, October 2019, against Michigan in the whiteout. They were taking it to the Wolverines. That was the same weekend that his younger brother, Liam Clifford, committed to Penn State. And at that point, you're talking about a redshirt sophomore. And I think the most frustrating part is it seems like he maxed out early on in his career. And I think a lot of people have felt like that was the case, especially coming out of this offseason. And the coaching staff who evaluates these guys on a day-to-day basis, continues to pile all the snaps to Sean Clifford, and we're now through 2/3 of the season. And I think people are just to the point where they want to see what's behind door number 2, and they're willing to see Drew Allar stumble sprinting out of that second door if it means just getting a chance to see what that might look like. Because Mark, 41 starts is a lot, and when you don't have a lot of those remarkable wins to point to, the fatigue really does set in, and especially when you have a head coach and a starting quarterback during each of these years who say, we belong in the Big Ten title conversation. That's the expectation. That's where we need to be. It's not us applying that. It's the quarterback and the head coach telling us that at every juncture, that that's where they need to be.
And that was my point about if you were going to go with a different option, trying to get it in place before this Ohio State game was probably the way to go. But that's beating an injured or dead horse. I'm sorry, horse fans. I didn't mean to go in the wrong direction there. But no, in all seriousness, you look at the stats from this game, and he's 32 of 47, which is close to 70%. But I mean, what have I said all season long? I mean, not all season, but the last few games. I mean, Sean Clifford is who he is. He's a 60% career passer. So what does that mean? It means when you have the most passing attempts of the season by what was it, 10, Tyler? Was 37 the most that he had before, something
Yeah, that was
like that?
10 more throws on Saturday than any point in the season.
That's giving you that many more opportunities to have incompletions. He's not a 70% thrower. Look at his stats, people. Look at his career stats. It's like unbelievable. He's like right at 60% every single year. And that
he threw 52 times in Columbus last year in the 9-point loss.
But the point is, 60 used to be like a good stat for a college quarterback. But now, I mean, you have guys like Stroud is a 70% thrower. I mean, so I just, when you lean that heavily on the pass, and the thing is, I get it. It was working. It worked. But as you said, at what point is the other shoe going to fall? And they somehow survived the first half. And this is, like, to me, all credit to the defense, with him having 2 turnovers and still, leading at the half. But then you're waiting, and then you're waiting, and then they're into the fourth quarter. And then boom. I mean, and I know people are saying, well, it was people around him. Bryce Effner didn't throw a good block, but that was right in front of him. I mean, that wasn't his blind side. That was coming at Sean, and I think he could have stepped out of that. And then another interception. And I mean, to the best player on the field in that game, right? I mean, he threw it right to him and just didn't see him. And so I guess the point is, when you're trying to beat this team that you can't beat, what are you expecting is going to happen if you throw over and over and over again with this quarterback? It's that whole thing about, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and over again and having it not work and expecting it to work, or something like that. I'm not phrasing it the right way, but I just, again, nobody expected Penn State to win this game. And ultimately, Penn State didn't win this game. And it kind of unfolded not exactly how we thought, but I think a lot of us did feel that if Penn State was going to win, that Sean Clifford couldn't make mistakes, right? That he had to be more of a game manager, and that's because that's who he is, and it didn't play out that way.
Yeah, and this was a game where C.J. Stroud, didn't really get it going until late, and when he got it going, he showed exactly how special he was in key moments on the road in a very impressive environment for a noon kickoff in Beaver Stadium. And, oh, by the way, they're without a couple of top performers, and Mayan Williams and Jackson Smith and Jigba, and they're able to find solutions and come up with stuff. We talked about it, the way Ohio State has recruited during the stretch, and Penn State trying to catch up there. Those are the things that catch up to you over the course of the game that make the margin for error so small. But Ohio State built that margin for error a little bit bigger in Penn State's favor with the pre-snap penalties, with just the inefficiency on offense that they really hadn't displayed through the first 7 games of the season. And ultimately, Penn State was able to move the football. Sean Clifford's stats reflect that. And overall, the offensive stats, Penn State put up nearly 500 total yards. That's more than Ohio State did on Saturday. They moved the football as well as you could have hoped in this matchup. But at the end of it, the cumulative body of work from Saturday, and I think to an extent from the first 2/3 of this game, Daniel, to me is a lot of, they are who we thought they were. That's Penn State football. That's Penn State football with Sean Clifford at QB1. Yeah,
I mean, the game was there for them to win. I think that's kind of what I keep coming back to, is that 21-16. You looked at what Penn State was doing. They were being effective. Clifford had rebounded pretty nicely from those early mistakes, but the wheels fell off, and they talk a lot about complementary football in wins. I thought this was there's a lot of complementary football happening in a loss here, in terms of the offense putting the defense in a bad spot off of the strip sack. Ohio State immediately taking advantage of it. I thought that the offense put the defense in some bad spots in that fourth quarter, but at the same time, the defense, when Ohio State has the ball at the 25-yard line and you have a lead, you can't let them go 75 yards in 3 plays for a touchdown there. I thought that both sides just kind of broke down in that fourth quarter. But going back to Sean Clifford, I think that going into the year, we kind of knew what the ceiling was in terms of a Clifford quarterbacked team. And that was barring something, unexpected in terms of Clifford taking a leap, or, some of the guys around him potentially taking a leap. I think that when you look at the beginning of the season, 10-2 was kind of where we expected this to be. I think we all expected to be 6-2 at this point in the year. At the same time, though, it's easy to sit in August and say, oh, 6-2, like, you'd feel pretty good about that. Coming out of October, going into November, you're in good position for a New Year's Six game, but it's a totally different beast to be in it. And to actually, to be at this point where tomorrow's November 1st, Penn State 6-2, but how it got here, what we've seen, I think that it colors it a little bit differently. I think Penn State had the opportunity to raise the ceiling on its season a little bit with what Mark talked about, where if you give Drew Allar a significant run against Minnesota, you know what you have there. You can potentially see if he can be a game changer in a spot against a team like Ohio State. But we kind of knew where the cap was with Clifford. And by sticking with Clifford, how Penn State has, I think that's kind of, why we're in that situation where we are right now. I mean, 10-2 is not a bad year by any means, especially when you've won only 11 games in the past 2 seasons. I think that it's a good step back in the right direction. But when you kind of have that what if in the back of your mind where that maybe it could have been 11-1, maybe it would have been, a real game against Michigan where if you get a bounce or something, things could go your way. I think that it is something that might stick with you a little bit longer as you go into the future.
I think we all have to be a little bit cautious because last year we covered a 5-0 team that finished 7-6 before we start saying this is a 10-win team here on October 31st, because they do need to prove it. And I think the big thing is this is another part of modern college football. Guys got an eye elsewhere come November. Unfortunately, I mean, if they don't, people are tapping on their shoulder potentially. That's the way it's going to work right now. Hey, why aren't you playing more? Hey, why is this guy playing in front of you? What might the transfer portal be able to do for you? There's all sorts of second guessing you can do if you choose to go down that path when you lose a game like this and you lose those college football playoff expectations and some of the rose is taken off of the season. But I think we've talked about before, the leadership in this locker room seems very good. They came back from the Michigan game. They played toe-to-toe with Ohio State like no one has this season, and I think Ohio State's going to be better for it. My question will be, is Penn State better for what happened on Saturday? Or are they going to wear this one like a bad hangover and stumble their way through this week and potentially through the month? Because that's where things get dangerous to me at this point for James Franklin. Look, year one of a fresh new long contract, but he's at an important point in kind of determining the overall perception here for Penn State. That's going to contribute to their ability to reach out, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 miles away and bring in a blue chip prospect. You never know what can make the difference in a situation like that. That could encourage guys to stay home instead of trying to go play for a college football contender away from home. So, Mark, when you look through what lies ahead for Penn State, what do you think is the most important pivot point for them after a really dramatic and emotionally devastating loss?
I think everybody's got to take a step back in the program and take a deep breath. And look at what the national perception of the program is now. Look what it's back to, okay? So you lose this game, you're ranked number 13, and you fall 3 spots in the polls. Okay, so what is that telling you? That's telling you that writers who don't cover the game, who don't cover your team every single day, still have that respect that you're a solid top 25 program. And a top 20 program. And really, if you take care of business, you're going to be right there, near or in the top 10. So there's that still to play for. I'm curious how many of these NIL deals that have been signed included provisions where if you sign it, you're also going to agree to be with the team through the bowl game. That's going to be an interesting thing. I don't know if anybody's going to come out and say that, but I do know from hearing what have happened at some other schools, I do think that's part of it. So, and I also think that you have, I think with the veteran players here, one of the interesting things is it might be a little bit different than last year, that I don't know that you're looking at however many players decide to skip the bowl game to prepare for the NFL draft. I mean, I think there are some, but I don't know that it's going to be the significant number that maybe it was last year. So, yeah, I mean, I think you have to look at it in the sense that these last 4 games, if you take care of business, you're going to win them. If you approach it the right way, you are going to win those 4 games. And as I said earlier, you're probably going to get yourself into a New Year's 6 game. And after the last 2 seasons, as Daniel mentioned, you win 11 games across 2 seasons. You know, you're lucky to get into the Outback Bowl last year. And the previous year, people wanted you to go to a bowl, even though you didn't deserve it. Now you're back to where you were pre-pandemic. Okay. You're back to where you were. Is that good enough? No, but it's a step. It's a step to getting back to attempting to compete with the better teams, with the best team. I shouldn't say the better teams. I should say the best team in the Big Ten. So I think that's what they have to hang their hats on. And, you know, we're gonna find out soon enough. You know, I think the positive about Indiana is that it's a 3:30 kick. They've gone out there so many times for noon kicks, and it's just like taking them 2 quarters to wake up. And it just is, but if they go out there and take care of business, and I think they're going to, you know, I think that's going to set a positive tone for those last 3 games. The best team you're going to face from here on out is Maryland. You get Maryland at home. I think that's a positive in my view. Then Michigan State would be, you know, you're getting Michigan State at home. So you only have one team on the road, and that's a team that, you know, looked pretty bad last week. I mean, I don't want to be too tough on them, Tyler, but I think it's all manageable there to easily go to get those 10 wins if they take care of things mentally. So that's the key.
Yeah, Indiana, by the way, they began this season 3-0. They began the season with a win over Illinois, which has been like the Cinderella story of the Big Ten, but they have dropped 5 in a row since then. They're at 3-5. Michigan State, which is the closeout of this regular season, they have lost 4 of 5 games, and then Rutgers has lost 4 of 5 games as well. So when Maryland is the biggest, biggest threat on your schedule remaining on Halloween, it should be a capable path for you to get to those 10 wins and maybe punch your ticket to an Orange Bowl or a situation like that. I think the underlying issue here as well, just going back to the quarterback conversation, it's one that we will never be able to get a read on in our formal settings, but you have to wonder about it. Where does the locker room stand on the quarterback play? What are they seeing on the practice field versus what they see in games? How much are they second guessing some of the decisions the way that we maybe are? Not outright, not going to the offensive coordinator or the head coach, knocking on their door and demanding answers, but speaking among themselves while they're having dinner back at the apartment or while they're checking their own video, in the facilities, stuff like that. You just wonder if there's maybe an undercurrent and how much the coaching staff needs to monitor something like that. I don't know how much it's going to affect a kind of a matchup in terms of point differential, but it's just something to gauge as you're trying to make sure your locker room stays intact and stays healthy mentally as much as physically during the final stretch here. And I know that's important for James Franklin. He talks about having everybody, on the same page and working in that same direction. I think that's just an aspect of this team, especially among younger elements of this roster who maybe are ready to go all in with their young quarterback. It's just something to juggle here. And Sean Clifford's such a leader. Maybe it's not an issue at all right now, but if things trend in a negative direction, that's an aspect beyond just we want to see Drew play. It's how is Drew not playing impacting the locker room culture? And there's something that's human nature and kind of unavoidable no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, I think describing that as an undercurrent is a good way to do it. I mean, all indications from what we heard early in the year, Drew Allar was really impressive on the practice field. I go back to what the defensive players were saying, because I think that's kind of a good measuring stick when it comes to a player like that. And the defensive players were offering glowing reviews. Some of the offensive linemen we talked about Drew Allar finding his voice as the season has gone on, as his time at Penn State has gone on. So we'll see what it looks like. I think that it is an interesting balance when Sean Clifford has talked a lot about the age gap that he has between some of the younger players, and you can kind of push that off as a bit of a joke sometimes, but there is a reality where he is a 24-year-old and there's a lot of 18, 19-year-olds in there that might want to see something different, that haven't been with him for 3 or 4 years, his whole starting tenure and stuff like that. But it is something to monitor. I mean, given the way that this program operates, I don't necessarily think it'll be something that we see kind of break out in the public. I think that Penn State has always done a good job in kind of united front or, taking their keys from James Franklin. But,
Yeah.
It is something to think about because, we've seen how this team can spiral pretty easily. I mean, we saw that in 2020, we saw it in 2021. There was the chance that it could have happened earlier this month. It didn't. Now we're going to see it again in kind of a different view in some different circumstances, given, that we're later in the year. The games are winnable, but Indiana can be plucky. I mean, depending on what happens in the bottom of the top 25 next week, Maryland could come in here ranked in a couple weeks, and
he said hopefully.
I did not say hopefully.
I'm kidding.
Yeah, but I mean that'll be a big game for them, big game for Rutgers, and then I think Michigan State is kind of a wild card right now, given what we saw this weekend. And where that program is. So it'll be interesting at the end of this month. I mean, I think that Penn State passed its first test in terms of the avoiding the spiral. And this will be the second one. And I think that this one will be even more difficult, given where we are in the year, given where guys' heads could be and given what is ahead for some of these individuals.
Tyler, can I make one point on Allar? I mean, just watching during the game and then seeing the TV replay and then being down there on the field at the end of the game. Yeah, I think his body language has been really good. When there was a big play, he's one of the first guys over there congratulating Clifford. This isn't a 5-star guy who's moping on the sideline because he's not playing. And I think that's a really good sign. Listen, I also want to be clear that, we could be tough on Clifford here. But listen, he's a 24-year-old quarterback. That's part of it anymore. But I have a ton of respect for the guy. I mean, he has a huge heart. He's the toughest quarterback or one of the toughest quarterbacks I've ever seen. And if he's healthy, he comes out and faces the music after every game. So there's a level of respect there that I think we all have. I don't want to talk for you guys, but I think I could safely say that I think we all have, that even if we are critical of him, we still respect the hell out of that guy. And I just think the dynamic there between him and Allar, and really it seems that whole quarterback room from the outside looking in seems really good. And I think it's the body language from Allar during games. I just think that's a real positive thing for a guy who we know is as good as he is, to not be getting down, to be sending the right message after Clifford's successful and being one of the first guys out there to congratulate him.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, we heard from Mike Yursich, and he actually credited Christian Veillere for setting the tone in that regard. When he lost his number 2 job to Allar, he said he has never wavered in his support, game days, practice, supporting, and that has seemed to resonate with the room. And it's important, everyone's, you feel like it's almost a 1-year rental with big-time quarterbacks anymore because of the way college football works. Right. So it's important to note that, and I completely agree with you. It seems like Drew Allar is really enjoying himself. And if you listen to our podcast, prior to Drew's enrollment, we didn't know how the season was going to shake out in any way, shape, or form, but he said he was completely ready to embrace, if this was what was required, a redshirt season, working behind a guy who's played 5 years of college football and then doing the best he could, going into his first full offseason as a college football quarterback. And he's ahead because of what happened in September of where we thought he might be. But it's been a little bit a while since we've seen him play a meaningful stretch of football, and you wonder if that might change. Daniel, just quickly to note what you said against Michigan, why this one might be a little bit harder to pick yourself off of, because after Michigan, you had the whiteout back at home and you had Ohio State still on the horizon, right? Those are two things you can really cling hard to, especially Ohio State. You beat Ohio State, that's going to cancel out the Michigan loss in a lot of ways, in a lot of people's eyes, and they're going to be back in that conversation. Now you're trying to pick yourself up and reach and grasp for something. Does a maybe ranked Maryland matchup a couple weeks from now do it? Does a trip to Bloomington, Indiana this Saturday do it? That's where the coaching staff and the leaders on this team, including Sean Clifford, off of a really rough outcome for him, and he talked about taking that personally. Those guys don't have time to waste because the month of November can get away from teams in college football these days. You don't want to land on that list. You want to finish strong. Speaking of finishing strong here, let's focus on some positives because Katron Allen, I think, continues to assert himself as a really strong presence. Got a couple touchdowns, one through the air, one on the ground on a 4th down rush that I thought he was going to be stopped on, gave that second effort, fought through contact, got into the end zone. What he's done the last few weeks, everyone had a bad game against Michigan, but in one half of football against Northwestern, 86 yards on 21 carries. Of course, the fumbles were an issue there. The week before, he goes for 111 yards and a touchdown against Central Michigan, 77 on 15 carries last week against Minnesota. And then here against Ohio State, he's at 90 total yards on 14 touches with a couple scores. And then lastly, Parker Washington. I mean, what a performance. If he can kind of stack these together in November, he and his season will be viewed very much differently than how it was 6-7 games into it. I just wanted to spotlight those couple of guys. And also Bryce Nefter got thrown into it with this start at right tackle with what he had to encounter. This one was a hell of a matchup for him to encounter. And unfortunately, the highlight reel on the other end is going to feature a lot of Effner in a negative light. And we have some things to sort through on the offensive line going on the road at Indiana. Is Caden Wallace back? Is Landon Tengwall available now? Will Landon Tengwall be available in November? Just a couple things to note there offensively. Go wherever you want with that, Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at the individual performances. I'll come back to Parker Washington because I wrote about him on Sunday morning for the site, Lions247.com. But it was just a very, very solid outing from him, or beyond solid. I think it was what we were expecting to see more of this year and what we were just kind of waiting to see, waiting for that big breakout game. But I went back and rewatched some of his catches. Obviously there was the long touchdown catch and run. I really liked the play where he came out of the backfield for a first down. I think 7 of his 11 catches went for first downs, which is obviously what you want to see. But there was one play, the throw up the right sideline. I think it was a 26-yard gain early in the fourth quarter, I believe. I was going back through my notes and it just said Parker absurd catch. And so I was like, oh wait. And in the fog of war at the end of the game, you're trying to remember when was that. So I went back and found it, and it was just Sean Clifford just placed a ball where only Parker Washington could get it over the defender, and he really laid out and made a really nice catch up the sideline. And I think that he really showcased what he's able to do and, how he can be a complete wide receiver. I know that he's someone who trying to project him to the NFL is a little difficult. He snuck into the first round of a couple mock drafts back in May. The production this year didn't necessarily match up with that, but he's someone who's going to be playing on Sundays. You look at how the NFL is trending, how in demand wide receivers are, especially in the draft, how many of them go, how high they go. I think that he is someone who, depending on what he does in terms of testing, what he does the rest of this year, he could be a day 2 pick in that second or third round. I've been just really impressed with him, and I think that film of him against Ohio State, there's a good chance, depending on when he does declare for the draft, whether that's after the season, if he comes back for a 4th year, I think that a big part of his highlight package is going to be him against these Ohio State defensive backs against this Ohio State defense.
And Mark, I wanted to know if you kind of had any commentary on your bold prediction. You're the one who suggested that we bring these back up on a Monday. So let's begin with yours, because last week, along with our score predictions, we tossed out, a quote unquote bold prediction, and I'll let you rehash it and let you kind of describe how things turned out.
Yeah, I predicted that Parker Washington was going to have more receiving yards than anybody else.
Whoops.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No. I'm sorry. It was Mitchell Tinsley. I meant Parker Washington. I meant Parker. No, I thought Mitchell Tinsley was going to have a breakout game and have more receiving yardage than anybody else in the game. And, well, I mean, I guess Parker Washington had more. I guess Marvin Harrison Jr. had a couple more. I guess even Julian Fleming had more, which, so I did not get that one.
Keep going. Case Stover, Buka,
Theo Johnson.
Theo Johnson.
I
we'll get
been
there.
Better. You know what I would say, though, in all seriousness, is that, and I deserve all that, the hassle that I'm getting over that. Remember back in 2020 when Penn State lost Fleming, 5-star from Pennsylvania. People didn't even know who Parker Washington was. Penn State fans didn't even know who he was. Kid out of Texas, 3-star, and look what he's become. And Fleming obviously hasn't emerged like that. Now he's in a different wide receiver room. I mean, Parker Washington was behind kind of Jahan Dotson, and Julian Fleming's been behind like 6 Jahan Dotsons in that wide receiver room. But yeah, it was good to see Parker Washington break out. I thought Mitchell Tinsley was prepared. I still am high on Mitchell Tinsley. I think he's been a good addition to the team, but kudos to Parker Washington for proving me wrong. And wow, how impressive was Marvin Harrison Jr. when they don't have one of their, who's allegedly their top receiver, to see that guy step up against a very good secondary. I think you have to look at both of those guys and just say, congrats, you did a great job. My bold prediction was boldly wrong.
Yeah, so was mine. I predicted that Zakee Wheatley, the takeaway king, it was going to come up with the takeaway on Saturday. It didn't happen. No one did on the Penn State defense. CJ Stroud played clean football, no turnovers. And additionally, Zakee Wheatley actually played his fewest snap count against any Big Ten opponent this fall. So I was way off in terms of his involvement. Unfortunately, guys, we just didn't see the playmakers and the game wreckers on the defensive side of the football in this matchup. And that's really been lacking because we've seen those kind of guys in this Penn State-Ohio State series from the Buckeyes in big moments defensively. Micah Parsons was like a fleeting glimpse at greatness here because of how quickly his career came and went. But the last few years, some of these bigger moments just haven't seen. I don't know about Bakeda. I felt like delivered some of them last year in some critical moments, but that has been missing. The ability to get a quarterback off platform when you really need to just quicken the pace of the passing game by even a fraction of a second. Give your talented defensive secondary a chance. Haven't seen the pressure pile up. I know I'm off on a tangent, but just defensively, guys. Haven't seen those kind of in a matchup like this. Didn't see that kind of step up moment from really across the board, which is unfortunate because you needed probably 1, 2, maybe 3 of those kind of plays to swing the pendulum in Penn State's favor in a game like this.
I think that segues nicely with us going over my bold prediction now, which was CJ Stroud under 60%. Not even close. I just had to double check my math on 26 to 33, and that comes out to, rounding up to 79%. So way off there. I think that maybe, I think the pass rush has been maybe one of the bigger disappointments, I think, this year when you look at the defense. What we were expecting out of Adisa Isaac, what we were expecting out of Chop Robinson, denied Ennis Sutton. I think that the potential is there, and we've seen some flashes. We talked a lot about Chop Robinson being around the quarterback. But I think that you're seeing the difference between, a quarterback hurry versus a quarterback sack, a pass breakup versus an interception. That there's, a distinct difference in those things. And the good or great defenses can take that next step, can turn those almost into some things, and we can see how that changes a play. And Saturday was the perfect time for it. I mean, that's what you needed. You knew you were going to have to steal a couple possessions while also trying to give that offense as few possessions as possible. And Penn State couldn't do it. And I think that, the offense, Clifford's turnovers, were huge in the game. But I look at the defense, and I think that after talking to the players and looking at the flow of the game, I think I understand what they were doing a little bit better in terms of trying just not to get beat over the top, being content with those plays over the middle. But if you're going to do that, you have to tackle Cade Stover. Then you can't get beat when Ohio State finally does go deep, like on the Emeka Egbuka 42-yard pass. So, I think that you were going to need those guys to step up and make game-changing plays. And I thought that the defense, for the most part, was solid. You take away a pick six, that's 37 points to an Ohio State team that is, elite. And then if you take the other 2 turnovers away, that's another 14 points off the board. I think I saw it pointed out today that JT Tuamalo led to 14 points off of his play today in a game that Ohio State ended up winning by 13. That's what Penn State needs. I think that, you needed those playmakers to step up. Didn't really come through. And I think that that's something that I'll be watching for these final 4 weeks of the season.
While you were talking, I did some math myself, Daniel, and I'm going to actually say 5 starting defensive linemen here for Penn State because I'm going to include Chop Robinson as part of the conversation. So Chop Robinson, Nick Tarburton, Adiza Isaac, PJ Mustipher, Hakeem Beeman, 5 starting defensive linemen. None of them have missed significant time this season. Chop missed 1 game. 3 sacks total among those 5 names, guys. 3 sacks total. We are 2/3 through this season. And it's actually pretty remarkable when you set up the stat sheet and you order it by sacks, the names that you go through. Johnny Dixon, who's a cornerback, has 3 sacks. Denai Dennis Sutton, who is not getting much more than 15 to 20 snaps per game and hasn't had a sack, I think, since September, is at 3 sacks as well. Abdul Carter, who's a linebacker and just started his first game a couple weeks ago, is at 2.5. No one else has more than 1. So I think you're right, Daniel. I think we got through that Auburn game and the stat sheet jumped a little bit because of the sacks they got on the road in the SEC. And you said, it seems like this is going to be where it needs to go in Big Ten play. But right now it's taking you back a couple of years and where we're talking about almost sacks, and almost sacks drive people nuts. And it was a huge missing part of the ingredients on Saturday. And quite frankly, in this Ohio State versus Penn State matchup, year by year by year, there's been some where Sean Clifford has gotten pummeled. I don't recall an Ohio State quarterback really spending significant time under duress against these Nittany Lions. And that really adds up when you're talking about fourth quarter composure, fourth quarter health for the quarterback. Guys, let's finish here. We got James Franklin on Tuesday. We've got practice to look ahead to. Indiana is the matchup to look ahead to on Saturday. But, Mark, this feels like a week where it goes beyond the matchup. As we've discussed so much, coming out of Beaver Stadium, you understand why the players were hanging their heads. You understand why James Franklin showed up as quickly as possible and left that press conference. That was really rapid for James Franklin and a post-game setting. What are you looking at this week for these Nittany Lions? What are you looking to hear? What are you looking to see that's going to give you an indication of things?
Let's see how quickly they could put that behind them. I mean, it was almost, symbolic maybe, that after the game, if you watch on the Brennan cam that I did, and I usually don't plug this, but it was interesting to me that Franklin usually spends significant time on the field, meeting with recruits and that sort of thing. And he literally jogged. That was the quickest I've seen him get off the field in a long, long time. I mean, he jogged back through the tunnel and he was very nice to people, but he was like clearly, let me through, let me get back, let me get back there as soon as possible. Then he got out to us. I mean, we joke around. We have a little pool of when James Franklin's going to show up in the media room. And I think it was way under what anybody expected. The players, I was a little bit surprised that when given an opportunity to say, how would you assess your performance, that Sean Clifford just basically said it's a team game, that kind of thing. That surprised me a little. After the Michigan game, PJ Mustipher, we made a lot of the fact that he said, hey, that was embarrassing. I would imagine on their own, they're owning this stuff. But I think they have to put that behind them as quickly as they can, because, again, it's right there for you to still be where you haven't been since before the pandemic. I mean, that pandemic, Penn State did, and Franklin has admitted this, and for a lot of different reasons. Penn State did not handle that pandemic season as well as a lot of other programs did. And I think it knocked them backward for a couple of years. Well, listen, you're not in the Big Ten title contention now. You're not in national title contention, but you could get back to where you were. So I think Clifford was the one who said, flush this one, focus on the last 4 games. You hope, if you're a Penn State fan, if you're a Penn State player, you're able to get back to that New Year's 6 bowl game, because we've seen it. We've been there, Tyler, right? That's a different level of bowl game. It's handled a different way. It's handled much like, the NCAA tournament in hoops. It's handled much like the BCS championship games are, or the college football playoff games. It's the same kind of feel. So
they treat the media fantastic.
Yeah, but they also treat the players and everything.
Yeah.
And it's the same media situation. So I think for these young players to get in that atmosphere where they're so protected, that I think it would be a good thing for them. So again, I know I'm rambling on about this, but they have to put that behind them, focus on what lies ahead, and we're going to know soon enough. By halftime of that Indiana game, I think we're going to have a really good idea which way this team is going. I don't think they're going to say all the right stuff this week because they always do, right? They're going to say all the right things. Franklin is so savvy that he's going to definitely say the right things. Their leaders are so savvy that they're going to say the right things. Halftime of the Indiana game, halftime in Bloomington, 5 o'clock out there in Bloomington on Saturday. We're going to have a real good feel for it.
Yeah, 1-0 is going to be the mantra again this week. To me, November is about 4-0. I think back to 2017, they lost a couple heartbreaking games against Michigan State and Ohio State that in one fell swoop kind of took them out of all that national conversation buzz, but they finished on a win streak. They got out to the Fiesta Bowl. They beat a really quality opponent in Washington. They got to 11 wins. It's there for you, and that would be big bouncing back for James Franklin. And you get to that point, you still look back at this past Saturday, and it stings a little bit. But if you look past it this Saturday and you see that as the moment the floodgates open and led to a really tough November for you, then that changes the complexion of this entire 2022 calendar year. So we got a lot to cover as usual at Lions247.com. We'll continue to do that in the days ahead. I know that Tyler Calvaruzzo already has a basketball recruiting notebook from some prospects who are in Beaver Stadium, recruiting in full force as well in the 2023-2024 cycles for football. A lot of coverage coming your way at Lions247.com for our VIP subscribers. We'll step away for now. We're back with another podcast midweek out of the James Franklin press conference right here on the Lions247 Podcast.